Healthy food really does not need to look this depressing. No, you do not need to give up tasty food in order to eat healthy. In this video, I'm going to share 3 recipes that I think are pretty healthy and, more importantly, taste unreal. Each dish is customizable, so you can adjust things to your taste preferences, is low calorie, doesn't use any convenience ingredients, things like jarred tomato sauce for example, and can be put together in less than 15 minutes. But before we start, I want to add a small caveat about the word healthy. When you think about it, there isn't really a clear definition of healthy eating. For some people, a healthy diet is one filled with fruits and vegetables. For others, it's a diet that avoids carbs, etc, etc, etc. My point is that everyone has their own idea of what a healthy diet is. These recipes are what I think are healthy for me and my lifestyle. But if they don't work for you, that's completely fine. There's plenty of recipes out there, and I'm sure some of them are better suited for you. Anyway, let's start with breakfast. I'm a big fan of breakfast, and more often than not, I'm eating oats. There's definitely worse options health-wise. Oats have quite a bit of protein and fibre, and loads of minerals and vitamins. Plus, they're so cheap. The obvious thing that you can make with oats is porridge, but I've been making something slightly different recently. A dish called overnight oats. Overnight oats are basically the same thing as porridge, but they're actually served cold and have a slightly looser texture. This is my basic overnight oats recipe. To start, I'm adding 50 grams of rolled oats to a jar, and then I'm pouring in 100 grams of milk. You could also use water, but it'll taste like shite. Then I'm adding an extra 40 grams of Greek yogurt for some creaminess, 1 tablespoon of erythritol, I don't know how you pronounce it, but I'm using 1 tablespoon of this sweetener, though 1 tablespoon of honey or maple syrup would also be a good shout. I'm then adding a pinch of cinnamon and a pinch of salt. I'm stirring that mixture together, and then I'm leaving the jar uncovered in the fridge overnight. If you check on the oats like 8 hours later, they'll have formed into a sort of cold, viscous porridge. To serve it, I'll just give that mixture another stir, and then I'll shamelessly eat it straight from the jar. An important note here, by the way, don't forget the salt. We're not adding salt because we want the oats to taste salty. We're adding salt because we want the oats to taste more like oats. In general, when you're adding salt to your food, your goal is to improve the flavour of everything else. Salt basically stimulates your taste buds and makes everything else taste better. That little pinch of salt that we're adding here won't be noticeable in terms of saltiness, but the difference it makes to the dish is actually incredible. I'll be talking more on this topic in a future video, but yeah, for now, I can't emphasize this enough. Add salt to your oats. Anyway, that's my basic overnight oats recipe. And there's nothing wrong with it just like that, but the thing that I love about overnight oats is how customizable it is. You can basically bang anything on top of it and it'll work. My personal favorite combination is maple syrup, tahini, and sliced banana. This version is so nice. To make this version, I'll make that same basic overnight oats recipe first. Then in the morning, I'll give it a stir, and then I'll top that up with some sliced banana, tahini, and maple syrup. And honestly, it's so good. And for those who are interested, this is the nutritional information for the basic recipe and the banana, tahini, maple syrup version as well. In general, there's 2 things you really can't go wrong with: a slice of toast and a fried egg. So for lunch, we're going to use both in my sauteed garlicky leeks recipe. You get this lush combination of garlic and caramelized leeks coupled with this creaminess that you get from Greek yogurt and the fried egg. One quick aside, this recipe is based on one from BBC Good Food, so for the sake of attribution, there's a link for the original recipe in the description. Anyway, to get started, first I'm chopping a couple of medium leeks into thin slices. I'm melting about a tablespoon of butter in a frying pan on medium heat. Oil would also work fine here, but I much prefer the taste of butter. Once the butter is melted, I'm adding the leeks to the pan. Then I'm adding 4 cloves of minced garlic. I know that's quite a bit of garlic for the average person, but I like my food really garlicky. But if you want to spend any time in society in the near future, you should probably use less. I also think my garlic burnt a little bit here. I've only just started using this induction hob and I haven't really got used to it yet. So yeah, try not to burn yours. While those leeks are cooking, I'm heating up about a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil in a non-stick pan on medium heat. When the oil's heated up, I'm cracking in 2 eggs and then I'm seasoning them with salt and pepper. I'm cooking them gently on medium heat until the tops are firm. By the time the eggs are done, the leeks should be more or less ready as well. It took about 7 minutes until the leeks softened for me. At this point, I mixed in about a teaspoon of smoked paprika, though any spice with a bit of kick would be fine. Whatever you're using, you've got to be careful here though, because chili powders burn really fast. Once I've added that paprika, I'm only leaving the pan on the hob for like 30 seconds at max. Then I'm taking that off the heat and putting it aside. While all that's happening, I'm toasting 2 slices of some fancy sourdough bread. Wholemeal bread in general would probably be a healthier choice, but unfortunately wholemeal bread doesn't make very clickable thumbnails. To plate this, first I'm spooning about 3 tablespoons of Greek yogurt over the 2 slices of toast. Then before I add the leeks, I'm seasoning the yogurt with a pinch of Maldon sea salt and a few cranks of black pepper. You could just use table salt, but this Maldon sea salt stuff adds a nice texture to the dish. Then I'm dividing the leeks between the 2 slices and I'm topping that with the eggs. Finally, I'm finishing the dish with a splash of hot sauce and a squeeze of lemon juice, except for the fact that I completely forgot about the lemon. I suppose there's quite a few elements to this dish, but when you break it down, it's a pretty simple recipe that genuinely has a lot of flavour. The different layers with the toast, the yogurt, the salt, the garlicky leeks, and then the eggs provides a lot of taste and textural contrast that makes this dish very satisfying in my opinion. Here's the nutritional stuff for anyone who's interested. For dinner we're going for a classic, tomato sauce and pasta. But my version's slightly different to the typical tomato sauce recipe. Based on most of the recipes that I've seen, a traditional pasta tomato sauce is made by taking fresh or tinned tomatoes, a bit of butter, and then some flavourings like onions or whatever, and simmering that mixture until it forms a thick sauce. That approach is obviously fine, it's a classic for a reason, but it definitely takes longer than 15 minutes. So instead, I'm using these 2 ingredients to speed up the process: passata and tomato puree. Passata is just strained tomatoes. It's tomatoes without all the fibrous bits. That means straight from the package, you've already got a smooth and pretty thick tomato sauce. But the traditional method of making a tomato sauce does more than just reduce the liquid. It also amplifies the taste of the tomatoes. So to compensate for that, we're using tomato puree. A tablespoon or 2 of this puree adds a lot of flavour. I don't know, it adds a sort of depth to the sauce, I suppose. So all of that's good and well, but in my opinion, a basic tomato sauce and pasta is pretty bland, regardless of how the sauce is made. I think it's better to think of this dish as more of a base that you can add extra stuff to. For example, you could add some extra herbs or spices, some roasted vegetables, or some protein of some sort. In my recipe here, I'm going to add some mustard seeds and I'm going to add some sliced sausages. Anyway, let's stop waffling and actually make the bloody sauce. First, I'm dicing a medium shallot as finely as I can. You could use any onion here really, but I think shallots are a little bit sweeter. I'm going to caramelize them in a saucepan with about a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil on medium heat. As long as I keep stirring them, I don't think the shallots will burn. So ideally, I'll be able to keep them cooking while I prepare other ingredients, and I'll only have to stir them occasionally. For me in this recipe, other ingredients just means the sausages. I recently read about J. Kenji Lopez Alt's method for cooking sausages, and I thought it was genius. Instead of just frying the sausages, his trick is to poach the sausages in water until they're cooked throughout, and then fry them briefly to get some browning. That way you don't end up with burnt sausages by the time that they've cooked all the way through. The only caveat is that you need an instant read thermometer. If you don't have one, they're definitely worth the investment, but if you really don't want to get one, you can just fry the sausages instead. Either way, I'm going with Kenji's approach, so I'm filling up a pan with water, I'm adding about 4 run-of-the-mill pork sausages, and then I'm bringing the water to a boil over high heat. I'm going to keep the sausages in the water until they reach about 60 to 65 degrees inside. Once they reach that temperature, I'm draining the water and then I'm wiping out the pan with a tea towel and I'm putting it back onto medium-high heat. I'm frying the sausages in about a tablespoon of butter until they've got some nice browning. Again, you could use oil instead of butter here, but the smell of butter and sausage cooking together is so nice. In any case, once I'm happy with the colour, I'm pulling the sausages out and I'm slicing them into bite-sized pieces. So that's the sausages done. Back to the shallots. This is what they look like after about 5 minutes, and they were already smelling amazing. For me, they're caramelised enough, but if you've got more time to caramelise them longer, then definitely go for it. The longer that you caramelise the shallots, the sweeter and richer they're going to taste. But for me, I'm moving on, so now I'm going to add my aromatics and spices and all that. In my case, that's 4 cloves of garlic and a teaspoon of mustard seeds. You could add the aromatics and spices later in the cooking process, but they just won't taste as good. When you add aromatics and spices to some sort of cooking fat, you're actually releasing the flavour from the aromatics and spices. You're also infusing that cooking fat with the taste of the aromatics and spices so that it gets evenly distributed throughout the sauce. This process is called tempering. And another thing that I'm actually tempering is the tomato puree. I'm adding about 1 tablespoon of the puree and then I'm frying that alongside all the other aromatics for like 30 seconds. You got to be really careful when tempering though, because aromatics and spices and all that, they all burn quite fast. You got to make sure you've got some sort of liquid at the ready to stop the tempering process. In our case, that's 350 grams of passata, but you could also use something like wine or stock or even just water. I'm also adding about a tablespoon of balsamic vinegar and a handful of fresh basil. The balsamic is quite a nice addition to the sauce, by the way, because it adds both acidity and sweetness. Usually when you're making a tomato sauce, you'll get that effect by adding a bit of lemon juice for the acidity and a bit of sugar for the sweetness. So if you've got those ingredients instead, those would also work fine. So at this point, when I'm usually making a tomato sauce, I'd bring it to a boil and then I'd leave it on a simmer for a while to reduce it. But if anything, this sauce is too thick, so I'm actually adding a splash of water to loosen it. Then I'm seasoning the sauce with some salt and pepper, but stupid me decided to add a literal fistful of salt, so I had to actually add more balsamic vinegar to compensate for that. If you're wondering why balsamic vinegar compensates for adding extra salt, it's because when something is too salty, you can use something with a bit of acidity to kind of balance it out. If I'd used too much lemon juice or balsamic, for example, I could do the inverse and add a little bit of extra salt to compensate for that extra acidity. In any case, once I'm happy with the taste, I'm leaving the sauce on the lowest possible heat while the pasta cooks. To do that, I've got a pan full of water at a boil. I'm intentionally adding a fistful of salt this time, and then I'm chucking in about 250 grams of wholemeal fusilli, though any pasta would be fine. This specific pasta takes 9 minutes to cook according to the instructions, so I'm cooking it until al dente, which took about 7 minutes. Just make sure to adjust the times accordingly based on whatever pasta you're using. Now this is a bit controversial for some people, but I'm not adding any oil to my pasta water. No matter what anyone tells you, the idea that oil stops the pasta from sticking together is complete rubbish. All you have to do if you want to stop the pasta from sticking together is to stir it every now and again. Anyway, once the pasta is al dente, I'm pinching a few tablespoons of the pasta water and I'm adding it to my sauce. In general, adding a bit of pasta water to your sauce helps the sauce to stick to the pasta. Finally, I'm adding the drained pasta to the sauce alongside some sausages and some sliced chives, and then I'm mixing everything together. So this recipe isn't mind-blowing or anything, but it's a pretty tasty tomato pasta that tastes way better than anything you'll get from a jar and can be made much faster than any traditional tomato sauce. Here's the nutritional info for that per serving. This probably makes enough for about 3 servings. I know there's loads of celebrity chefs out there like Jamie Oliver and Gordon Ramsay who make these like 15-minute meals and they get loads of flack because the recipes actually take like an hour to make in reality. But I genuinely think that these recipes can be made from start to finish in 15 minutes or less once you know what you're doing. Yeah, it might take you a little bit longer the first few times you make them, but once you know the recipes and how best to apply it to your kitchen or whatever, you'll be able to make these in no time.